so you know, we're recording this meeting because we do like to record all of our forums, and Greg does a great job of putting them up on our website. And I think we technically do have a YouTube channel and everything like that, since a lot of people aren't able to attend, but we usually cover some amazing, interesting information on these. So that's why the recording is going. So everyone, if you could just keep yourself muted during this, so a lot of our presenters have the floor, that would be wonderful. So having said that, I'd just like to welcome everyone this evening. My name is Megan Bond. I am the chair of the Environmental Caucus, and I'd like to welcome everyone this evening, especially Teresa Kevney, who's the chair of the DFL Rural Caucus, our co-host for this evening. And we are going to do a well water quality forum, followed by just a short full caucus meeting. Then just to jump ahead of a couple things, our next forum is going to also be on November 12th about plastics and just all the problems that they cause with single-use plastics. But purpose of these forums, and there might be a third coming up, is to really focus on getting some good ideas as well as supporting points for potential resolutions that we might be forming. We're right in the process of writing resolutions, as you all know. Can you all hear me okay? Do I need to put on a headset? We're good? Okay. Sorry, I should have checked. Okay. We are in the process of gearing up for another election year, which means convention year as well. And so we have our precinct caucuses coming up February 27th. And then you will, at which point you will have resolutions to propose. Our Vice Chair, Matt Dahl, is our resolutions committee chair. He will be here, but he's running a little late. He and his wife just had a baby about 5 months ago. So it's the baby's bedtime. So, but he will be here in a moment. But just starting out to say that our committee is starting to do a lot of work. He did, to our membership, send out a poll for people who might have ideas and supporting points for our resolutions committee. Oh, here is Matt in the waiting room right now. So I'll just pass it off to him. But as we do this, the purpose of these forums, and like I said, we're going to have one tonight, one on November 12th, would be to start working on forming ideas for resolutions on this, and then submitting them in the form that Matt sent out, I think just earlier this week, earlier this week. So look for that in your email. We can send it out again. I think he's here. If he's connected to audio, I can let him do a little introduction. Are you connected to audio, Matt? Yeah, yes, Wes, I can drop the link in the chat there as well too. Yes, and I will drop the link to the survey in the chat as well. So I won't keep up any further. I'll let Matt talk a little bit more about the resolutions process and committee at the end, because he's just getting signed on, so I won't take up too much of your time. But this evening's forum is going to be on well water safety, and we have two wonderful speakers, Carly Griffith from the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, and Jeff Broberg from one of our geologists from down in Rochester. I'll let you guys each tell, let Vita do a little bit better of an introduction as well, because I know Vita, and as well as Janelle, another one of our board members, have been doing a lot of work on well water safety down in their area towards southern Minnesota. So go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, Jeff Broberg. Janelle actually reached out to Jeff when we started to fight our battle with Niagara, right? The water bottling plant that's proposed for very near a house down here in Elko Newmarket. Jeff is a geologist with MNWO, Minnesota Well Owners Organization. And he helped us organize a clinic. We had over 200 people that came and had their water tested, and they learned a lot from Jeff and the other geologists that were there. So Jeff is very passionate about helping people protect their wells, being educated about contaminants that might be affecting their wells. He's held many of these clinics all over our state. And he has also testified at the legislature about the issues that you're going to hear about tonight. So we're very excited to have Jeff with us. He is a retired geologist, professional geologist with 40 years experience with natural resources, land issues, and environmental risk management. And when he's not organizing and conferencing well clinics, or talking to legislators. He very much enjoys trout fishing. And our second guest tonight, I will also introduce, since we will let them just one follow another here, is Carly Griffith. Carly is not new to our forums. Carly's spoken here before, and many of you may know her as a water policy director for Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. She is a PhD candidate in geography from the UW-Madison, my alma mater, also holds a BA from Colby College and an MA from Brown University. Before joining MCEA, she was a PhD fellow at Midwest Environmental Advocates. She also taught legal studies program at UW-Madison and was an editor for a magazine. So her passion for water protection comes out of her love of swimming and canoeing and all things water. She also has a deep understanding of the threats to our groundwater and surface water, and is pairing her excellent research skills with her advocacy skills for MCEA. And we're very, very pleased to have both Carly and Jeff with us here tonight. Jeff, have we shared ours? Can Jeff share his screen?
Yes, I've enabled both Carly and Jeff to have that.
So
Good.
it is all you, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And just it's really good to see so many old friends here on this group. I see a lot of people that I've known and visited with over the years. So I'm happy to be here. A little introduction before I start my slides. I'm a licensed professional geologist and failed at retirement. I retired from corporate life in 2018 and have devoted myself to nonprofit work with water issues. And it's led me on an interesting path that's more engaging than any business I ever did, I think. And we started the Minnesota Well Owners Organization with some friends this year in 2018 with the idea that knowledge was power, that people needed to know what their water quality was, to know if they're at risk and what path to take. And too often that was inconvenient, too expensive. There's a million different reasons why people didn't own or test their water. I live on a farm north of St. Charles on Dakota land in Elba Township, in an area that has severe groundwater contamination due to the karst. And I spent most of my professional career dealing with karst issues in a wide variety of fashion. But we have an area where the surface water becomes the groundwater and comes out as surface water within sight. We can see through dye trace studies and our trout streams and the water quality that we have this water connection. It's interesting to me that we've settled this area, started 12,000 years ago with people utilizing the springs and the pristine streams and water for their drinking water supply and sanitation. And it was thought by many of the indigenous tribes that springs were the sacred place of the spirit of water and medicine, and that every place where the water was coming out of the ground held that special status. Different indigenous tribes have different views. The Anishinaabe believe that water connects everything, that water is life. And I've really come to understand that better after I left my technical life, I guess. So I'm going to talk about those things a little bit, but I'll get into the slides so we can kind of keep this on time. And I'm hoping, can you see my whole slide? Let's see, let the slide show.
We can see your slides.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so our organization is MINWO, is Minnesota Well Owners Organization. It's organization, not association, because that would be MINWO, and that wasn't good. So we did MINWO and have been really building and growing a program of testing people's water, helping them with equipment that we loaned from Department of Ag that's funded by the Clean Water Legacy Act. and the use of a lot of volunteers in coordination with dozens, hundreds actually, of partners locally to hold local water clinics where we invite people to come and test their water for nitrates and chlorides. We recently completed one in Elko New Market that included arsenic, and we're learning more about these water issues all the time. But too many people and too many households have tainted drinking water. And we really need to think about this in the context that every private well owner is responsible for their own water well, their systems, their water quality. And we found that everybody cares about their drinking water. We go to these clinics and people are worried about their drinking water coming in. And if they have a good well test, we want them to be grateful for that. If it's not so good, we want to give them a path to treatment or an alternative water supply. It affects everybody, but there's a lot of variables that make this a little more difficult. That my well is not the same as Veda's well or anybody else's well in the state. Different times and geology and aquifers. So it makes it a little more complicated, but we have really good geology and we understand that pretty well. We have a lot of experience with drilling wells and have gotten better over time so that we can principally drill safe wells now almost anywhere in Minnesota. But we're seeing too that there's a fractured process in Minnesota with multiple agencies dealing with different parts of water. And we feel that we need public health to lead the way on water issues. So far, we've had a enthusiasm for conservation agencies to do that. Lots of success at the legislature promoting things like soil health and cover crops and perennial crops and those things, but they'll take a decade or a generation to improve our water. Minnesota well owners need to deal with the imminent risks that require immediate action. A little about my well. I have a 400-foot deep well. I believe it was drilled in 1911 using steam equipment. Didn't even have gasoline engines then. And they had a windmill technology that pumped the water into a 15,000-gallon cistern, also generated electricity. So the farm had DC power, lights in the barn and the house 20 years before there was real electrification. But it's 400 feet deep, but I've not been able to drink the water for over 20 years. When I bought it in 1986, it had 8.6 parts per million nitrates. Health risk limit is 10. Every time I tested it after that, it got higher until it got so high at 22 parts per million. I'd been hauling water from town for years that I started really looking close at the farming practices and the things that are causing our problems. And we'll talk more about that. But our focus is really that water is life, that it includes so many essential characters, that it's essential for almost everything that we do, and it connects us, and it's a way to, I think, organize people around their interests for that. We all want to be able to have safe water at our kitchen sink, and that requires well testing. We need to do that. And we found every well owner really cares about their well. At our clinics, we offer the opportunity for people to visit with consultants, geologists, hydrologists, engineers about their water. And it's amazing how much they want to talk with people about water. We've heard stories that you can't even believe. We found in the last year 2 Civil War era wells that are still in use. And one of them up by Alexandria asked, well, how do you know how old your well is? And she said, well, the house was built in 1860 and the well's in the basement. Well, that's water that's still being used, and it's a legacy of this, and everybody's concerned about it, but every well's different. And I mean, we go from hand dug wells. I just had a call from a friend that found a hand dug well in Preston, Minnesota just 2 weeks ago. or the older wells with the windmills that aren't cased and sealed and grouted, to the newer wells that are done by the well code. And over time, we abandoned and didn't have the ability to use springs and shallow groundwater and clean surface water like the indigenous people did. We started drinking wells in about the 1830s. The well code didn't go into place until 1974, and communities became protected from their wells in 1988 with the Safe Drinking Water Act. We have other provisions of the Minnesota Groundwater Protection Act that puts the Ag Department in charge of protecting our aquifers. One of the complexities in Minnesota is a broad geographic state with a lot of geologic provinces. We have what we term 6 groundwater provinces, where in each of these colored areas, the wells and the geology and the water quality is fairly similar, but different than the other areas. So the metro has a Twin City. It has a basin of groundwater that goes down, that people are now becoming worried about water supply, for example, and contaminants like PFAS and those types of chemicals. In the glaciated terrain, we have different areas. In 2 and 5 in particular, arsenic is an issue that occurs from the minerals that make up the sands and gravels of the aquifers. In the karst, we have rapid infiltration and farm chemicals that are rapidly infiltrating into the ground with fertilizers and pesticides. The same in 4, where it's all sandy, and we're moving to irrigation and row crop production throughout that area. And then 6 has some challenges with different minerals that are naturally occurring in the landscape and mining. But what we really need is a risk management approach to all of these various regions, and it's different in different places. Risk management 101 is you look at the consequences versus the likelihood. And that upper right-hand box of high is typically the intolerable things that you need to deal with the consequences, and we're under threat all over the state. And the bottom right is sinkholes. Those little wooded spots are sinkholes in the middle of ag fields with no buffers around them. All the drainage from those fields goes immediately into the groundwater. In central sands area, irrigation and row crops for increased ethanol production was contaminating the water with nitrates and pesticides, and feedlots and the proliferation around the state of mega feedlots, where we're now seeing applications of not just 4,000 animal units, but 20,000 animal units. And things like potato culture in northwestern Minnesota, where they're land clearing forests for irrigated potato production, the center pivot irrigation, where the data shows the groundwater is typically contaminated within 5 years. We know what the risks are, but there's few that are protected. DWSMAs, it's a funny acronym, means Drinking Water Supply Management Areas. That's how communities with over 25 connections define the areas around their cities where the groundwater could be at risk. And it's a map that's been generated with some scientific prediction of aquifers of how far the water flows within 10 years before it comes into the well. So various areas are on guard and watching the types of land uses and what happens in those DWSMAs. But you can see in terms of the total land area in Minnesota, it's only a small fraction of the land that's covered and protected under that Safe Drinking Water Act. And still, we know from testing, the Minnesota Ag Department testing through townships, all of these red squares are showing areas where of the wells that were tested, more than 10% of them are above the health risk limit for nitrates. In the area I live in southeastern Minnesota, the townships I live by, it's 40% of the wells are contaminated with nitrates, and people are still drinking that. Arsenic is a geogenic contaminant that occurs from the glacial materials. And you can see the pattern, the larger circles here are the areas where all the arsenic is. And when you start overlaying all of these, it's interesting to consider specific regions. Hastings has a very large drinking water supply management area. They're under level 2 of groundwater protection, mandating best management practices to improve the water within that zone. But look at how many wells are in that area. This is defined only to help the city of Hastings. It excludes action for anybody outside of that DWISMA, and the people that have those private wells within the DWISMA are hoping that the strategies for best management practices will help their water. Hope is not a strategy. It's a serious problem with imminent threats to these areas. And when you overlay all of these on the right, we believe there's 470,000 registered wells in Minnesota. And you can see where the patterns of contamination are. A large percentage of Minnesotans on private wells are susceptible to contamination from nitrates, from arsenic, from old, poorly constructed wells, and surface water infiltration. So why do we need public health? Well, public health has immediacy to it. If you test your water at one of our clinics and you find you have contaminated water, what are you going to do? You got to decide, are you going to continue to risk your health with arsenic or nitrates or whatever it is? Or are you going to say, oh yeah, well, somebody else will fix the problem? Public health talks about how it affects everyone. Conservation and land use don't do that. It affects everyone, but they're dealing with farmers and people that are running the land. We need a risk-based family health focus, and safe drinking water is immediate and a necessary need. We can't afford the time it's going to take for conservation measures that are slowly adopted and slow rates of protection. We need to do something now. Arsenic, I wanted to bring up in a little more detail because we just tested here in Scott County, the little inset map on the left-hand side, but you can see the pattern across the Midwest that's related to geology. The dark blue dots are over 20 parts per billion arsenic. That's twice the health risk limit. And we believe Mayo Clinic physicians are telling us now that they believe the health risks are widespread in these areas where people are drinking arsenic in their wells. And we've heard instances of even pets and of dying of that as a kind of a sentinel of arsenic. The data with new wells is that of the wells that are drilled every year, about 10 or 12% of those are high in arsenic, above the drinking water standard that should not be drunk without treatment. So we have these issues for private well owners all over the state. And the question is always, is it safe? And the compounds we're talking with are odorless, colorless, tasteless. You just don't know. It might taste good to you, but not be good for you. So what do we need? Try to wrap this up. Private wells are a personal responsibility. This is a chart by the health department of what they do now to protect public water systems compared to private wells. And the health department says, you know, the birth of the well is at the construction and the death of the well is at the well sealing. Those are the only things that private well owners have any protections under the laws. We don't get the benefit of regular testing that community water supplies have. We don't get the benefit of mitigation to address the contaminants or protect source water. For funding for construction, treatment, and repair, we're on our own. So we believe that there's 70,000 people that have high arsenic in their wells that have already been notified of that in Minnesota. That's a big proportion of people at risk. So who do we need help from? I mean, the governor it has to start with him. He needs to advise his agencies that these are priority issues. We've had difficulty with that, we'll be honest, that we've not got the sort of direction towards the health department. And too much of the focus seems to go to these long-range conservation programs that are needed and desirable, but they're not going to address the immediacy that we have here. There's a lot of other partners, media, businesses, and government agencies, academics, nonprofits, who are all part of this, and we're finding everybody in every community, or so many people in every community we work and want to help. And we need a culture about water. We need a notion that water is life, that it connects us all. Our critical needs, we need water testing. We're doing free water testing this summer. We've had 1,000 people come through our water clinics, and probably almost twice that many visited with us, including other events. But testing is the foundation of water stewardship. You can't know and guess what your water quality is, and it does change over time. My well went from 8.5, 8.6 to over 20 in 15 years. So you need to know what those trends are. We're not going to be able to drill our way out of aquifer contamination. We're going to have water treatment. And the question is, who should pay for the treatment? I'm truthfully an advocate that the polluter should pay, that we should have excise tax on fertilizers, for example, that would pay for our water treatment systems for both private and public areas. We need that source water protection, and we need it to move beyond the early adopters who are doing this as a voluntary action. We need best management practices like nutrient management plans and sinkhole protections over the whole landscape, not just the 10 or 15% of people who are taking advantage of new programs and incentive programs. We need public health leadership. Over 4 years, we've had bills we've proposed in the legislature to assist private well owners, and we have not been able to get a single hearing in the health divisions of the Senate or the House. They think it's a conservation issue, so we get a lot of this, but we get no action. This is a public health issue, and I understand all of the essential needs with public health. It's really hard job, touches so many people, but our drinking water is at risk. And we need to know that our water is protected and we can rely on having safe water. So Carly's going to talk more about our US EPA petition. We're asking for the federal government to take a new approach to this in communication and outreach, and really trying to gather all of the different pieces of our water management in Minnesota under one task in one area to address drinking water in the karst. The Clean Water Council's in a planning effort right now, looking at a 10-year commitment for private water wells to put money in every year for a variety of programs and outreach and assistance to private wells. And we need that education assistance, financial relief through whatever means possible. And we found a lot of enthusiasm for communities working together to do that. We need to fund water testing for all the wells. Told you we've got 980,000 wells at $100 a piece. That's big money to do that for free. Can we do it with screening? Can we do it in other ways through health monitoring? I've talked to physicians. If they tell their patients to test their water because they suspect they're sick from their water, their insurance company doesn't pay for it. We need things to come together to put a focus on this to serve those immediate needs. And I'll end it there and turn it over to Carly. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but thank you for your interest in this. And I think we are gaining momentum. The health department is visiting with us. I think we've got some conservation awareness now that while the things they're promoting for safe drinking water are good, they're not going to be fast enough. And we're going to have to continue to face this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And a quick question for you. Are you okay with us sharing your slides?
Most definitely.
Excellent. Yes. You had a lot of good data there that I think
Yep.
people would like to check out more closely. Thank you very much. And then we'll move on to Carly and try to do questions at the end.
See how I do this. I've got to stop sharing.
Stop share. Yep. Thank you, though. That was all excellent information. We all learned a lot.
I still see your slides up, Jeff.
Okay, now you should be able to share. Sorry.
Right. Thank you so much, Jeff. And I just want to say thank you to both the DFL Environmental Caucus and Rural Caucus for the invitation to speak tonight. I had the opportunity to speak to the Environmental Caucus last year, which was a really good experience, and I'm excited to be back here with Jeff. It's been an honor to work with Jeff on this issue. So I will go ahead and share my slides here. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Does it show the presenter mode or does it just show the
No,
slide?
you're
Just
good.
slide. Just your main slide you want, hon. You're all set.
Okay. All right, well, I will go ahead and jump in here. So I'm Carly. I am the Water Program Director at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And I want to build tonight on the information that Jeff just gave you to talk about areas of state and federal action, you know, to address the question of what can we do to address the persistent contamination of public and private water supplies in Minnesota. And I will focus on nitrate in my presentation. So at this point, we have likely all seen maps like these, which show that the most severe nitrate contamination in Minnesota is concentrated in vulnerable groundwater areas like the karst and the central sands. So the karst is in southeastern Minnesota and the central sands are in the central region of the state. You know, the state agencies have collected ambient groundwater data since the 1990s. The Department of Ag has tested over 30,000 private wells in townships and vulnerable groundwater areas. We have extensive data. We know the extent of the problem. But what I want to emphasize today is that the current resources and regulatory support available to people with nitrate contaminated water supplies, especially private well owners for the reasons that Jeff discussed, is not adequate to the crisis. So what I will do is I will talk about a petition to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency that MCEA, MinWU, and 9 other organizations filed in April to ask for federal involvement, as well as what we can do at the state level. And I think this is especially relevant to the 2 caucuses here tonight. Action at the state level. So I want to just briefly touch on health impacts. You know, one of the reasons we took the step of a petition to the EPA is that this goes beyond a water quality problem. It's also a critical public health issue. So that means that we not only need to put better prevention measures in place for the long term, we also need more immediate relief for impacted communities. So the federal limit of 10 milligrams per liter for nitrate was set many years ago in 1962 to prevent against blue baby syndrome. But there's been a range of peer-reviewed research at the national level and at the international level that has shown an increased risk for various cancers, colorectal cancer, thyroid cancer, ovarian cancer, bladder cancer, as well as adverse birth outcomes at levels as low as 3 milligrams per liter. So as Jeff discussed, because of the hydrogeological sensitivity of the karst region with the fractured limestone bedrock with a lot of conduits to the groundwater, what we know that surface land use very quickly shapes what contaminants are present in the groundwater supply. And the bottom line here is that the high concentration of feedlots and also of cropland, especially corn, in vulnerable groundwater areas like the karst means high inputs of nitrogen from manure and from commercial fertilizer. So feedlots, there's a map on the right-hand side here that shows that Minnesota is home to nearly 24,000 feedlots. That is feedlots of all sizes. The very largest of those, which are known as CAFOs, we have about 1,200. That's over the 1,000 animal unit threshold. And those, as Jeff has said, continue to grow every year, both in number overall and in the size of individual facilities. So, you know, feedlots are under the jurisdiction of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and the state permit system that we have focuses much more on those CAFOs that are at or above 1,000 animal units. However, inspections are few and far between. The goal, the aspirational goal of the state program is to inspect facilities 1 time a year if they have individual permits, and 2 times every 5 years if there's a general permit. But those goals often aren't met. And there are no requirements to monitor groundwater for discharges in land application areas in our feedlot rules or in our permits. And you know, the focus in the state permit system on those feedlots over 1,000 animal units doesn't recognize the fact that there may also need to be a broader transition to best management practices across the landscape that incorporates smaller and mid-size operations below that size threshold, which could be supported through targeted grant programs tied to nutrient management requirements to try to see that broad scale landscape change, regardless, you know, across various feedlot sizes. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I want to emphasize here is that there's 2 key issues. The first is application rate. So do we properly credit all nitrogen sources? Do we apply at and not above crop needs? And the second is time of application. So we know there's well-established science that fall and frozen ground nitrogen application in vulnerable groundwater areas comes with a much higher risk for nitrate contamination. Go to my next slide here. So at the state level, who has jurisdiction over groundwater? As you can see in this graphic, there are several agencies with different pieces of jurisdiction. The MCEA issues permits for the largest feedlot operations. The Department of Agriculture has jurisdiction over commercial fertilizer and pesticides, and the Department of Health has jurisdiction over public water supplies and the Minnesota Well Code that Jeff discussed. But once your well has been dug, whether it was before the code was put in place in 1974 or after, private well owners are on their own in terms of the safety of the water they drink from their well. And at the state agency level, this patchwork quilt of jurisdiction over the sources of the contamination, which again are primarily commercial fertilizer and animal manure, can lead to an unwillingness to accept responsibility. So last year, MCEA was approached by the Minnesota Well Owners Organization to help with the crisis that private well owners in particular face. So we looked at a section of the Safe Drinking Water Act that allows the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, to act when there is an imminent or substantial endangerment to human health caused by drinking water contamination. This has been an emergency area of authority for a while, but in 2018, after the lead crisis in Flint, Michigan, the EPA updated their guidance on the use of this area of emergency authority. And the updated guidance specifically names nitrate contamination in areas of karst geology as an area where Section 1431 emergency authority can be used. Also, because this emergency authority, you know, traditionally, as Jeff said, the Safe Drinking Water Act focuses on community water supplies, so public water systems. But because this area of emergency authority can be used to address aquifer scale contamination, it's a tool to help get better protection to private well owners as well as those on public water supplies. So if it chooses to use this authority, the EPA has broad discretion in how it can address the endangerment. It can issue administrative or judicial orders to anyone such as large feedlots found to be responsible for contamination, as well as state and local governments. So based on this updated guidance from 2018 and the extensive evidence that we have of contamination in the karst, MCEA decided to submit this information to the EPA and ask them to step in to protect the drinking water in this vulnerable area of Minnesota. And we were joined by 10 other organizations that are listed here on this page. We also have had nearly 1,000 individuals sign a petition that asks state and federal agencies to do more to protect Minnesota's karst region. So briefly, what do we want the EPA to do? So first and foremost, we've asked the agency to do an investigation into the sources of the contamination. And we've also made specific requests in the petition, some of which are on this slide here. For example, if there is a contaminated well, we've asked for a moratorium on new CAFOs, which again are those feedlots above 1,000 animal units in that area, or the expansion of CAFOs near that well until nitrate concentrations begin to reach safe levels. We've also asked in the petition that the EPA require responsible parties to provide free water testing and a free and safe alternative source of drinking water for impacted communities. What I do want to say here that what we have not asked the EPA to do is to just take over regulation entirely from state agencies. You may have heard incorrectly from some people that that's the likely outcome of this petition, but that's not how this works. So the EPA under this area of authority can work with state agencies that have jurisdiction over these different areas to require the state agencies to take additional actions that will remedy the crisis. But there will not suddenly be federal regulation that will circumvent local processes that are in place, like animal unit caps. There have not yet been any orders or enforcement actions taken under this petition. And there is no mechanism under the Safe Drinking Water Act to force the EPA to respond to our submission. However, we have provided information that we believe shows an imminent and substantial endangerment to human health, and now it is within the EPA's discretion to act. We know that the EPA is in touch with the state agencies. They've asked for 2 rounds of information submittals the agencies we named in the petition, and we will also continue to meet with the EPA to seek solutions. And in the interim, this is not just a wait and see game here. In the interim, we've started to seek some state level solutions. So I'll touch on those here to wrap up. So, because of that disjointed jurisdiction that I covered in that graphic earlier, we've also asked for EPA involvement to help coordinate and direct actions at the state and local level across those disjointed areas of jurisdiction. So the actions that we can take now at the state, especially at the state level, fall into 2 major buckets that I'll cover here. The first is public health, and the second is prevention. And I do want to say, because of the particular group on this call, that these are both areas where our state legislature could take a lead role to enable some of the broad scale investments and regulatory actions that we need to help curb this crisis. So first and foremost, for public health, this is where the long-term versus the short-term comes into play. And with public health, what we need is more immediate relief for people whose water supply is contaminated now, often through no fault of their own. So, as we've discussed at length, this is particularly critical for private well owners who don't have the same regulatory protections that those on public water systems have. So I've listed a couple of different types of public health actions that we would like to see at the state level. And I want to expand in particular on the idea of free access to laboratory analysis of water samples on the first hand, and then also financial support for water treatment or an alternative water supply. And I want to give you a little bit of context for the kind of program we could see at the state level. So Iowa is not usually a state that we point to that's further ahead on ag and water quality protections than we are, but they do have a grants to counties program. It was established in 1987, and it uses a fee on commercial fertilizer to provide a permanent fund source for grants to local county health departments to provide financial assistance to their residents for private water well services. So those services do include laboratory analysis of well water samples and well construction. The Iowa program, it does not include water treatment costs. But we have a fee on commercial fertilizer also in Minnesota, and it goes to a research fund that looks into soil and nitrogen research. And then it also goes to what's called an agricultural chemical response compensation board. But neither of those funds cover costs for private well mitigation. So again, in Minnesota, we have the fee on commercial fertilizer, but none of those, the funds generated through that fee go to costs for private well mitigation. In 2019, a bill was introduced to make private well mitigation costs for agricultural chemicals eligible for reimbursement under this fund, with an initial contribution of $500,000 from the Clean Water Fund, but it did not pass. And if anyone is interested to take a look at that bill, it is Senate File 2827. But this is an idea that I would say we should re-up. The idea of how we use our commercial fee on fertilizer in Minnesota, and whether we should expand support for private well mitigation costs to the use of these dollars. And then the second piece is prevention. And this is really a focus on those cropland sources, so commercial fertilizer and manure, that we know are the major contributor of the nitrate contamination problem. And what we really need here is broader changes in nutrient management with a greater emphasis on infiltration practices as opposed to edge of field conservation practices. So think that infiltration practices protect the groundwater and edge of field measures protect surface water runoff. So I do want to say that for this work, it is critical to work together with farmers as stewards of our landscape, with the shared common goal to protect the water at everyone's kitchen sink, and with the hope that that's a message that can unify us rather than divide people. So one particular idea that I want to give a little more context for here is the idea of grant programs to increase manure storage capacity and also to incentivize alternative manure management practices for those smaller and mid-sized feedlots that are not the focus of our state permit system. So Bowser had, there's funds under the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, that can fund partnerships with state agencies to do to provide cost share for different conservation practices. And in Minnesota, we did have a program under this grant from 2014 to 2020 that increased manure storage capacity for dairy and beef feedlots in the karst region that were under 500 animal units. So those non-permit, that size that's usually not permitted, with a goal to improve water quality. So there are also now additional eligible practices for this grant program that are alternative manure management strategies. So not just liquid pits, but also other new, dry storage options like compost application. So this may be another area where we can look at state investments for broader scale change beyond the permitted facilities of that really big size. And then just to end, I want to say that there's been a lot of just demand for action at the local level. And there are 2 local forums that will talk about this issue further. The first is tomorrow and it is hosted by the Winona Clean Water Coalition. It'll be held at Winona State University. And then the second is down in Fillmore County on November 16th, and that'll be at the Eagle Bluff Learning Center. So I did want to make a plug for both of those events. And happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carly. Awesome. So we had one question that actually might be more for Jeff. Bob asked, where would citizen well owners go to get their well water tested?
Well, great question. There's actually many counties provide that service and can send your samples in. They often get the advantage of a discounted rate through the state purchasing system. So you start typically with your county health department, environmental health department. There are 23 certified public labs across the state of Minnesota, and most of them take private well testing. That list of available labs is on the Department of Health website. And then we and other groups provide well screening with just the nitrate analysis around the state. And we typically do 12 or 13 a year, and many other counties have different styles of providing those services. So it's still not as convenient as it needs to be. It's cost is a barrier to people. A full range of water tests that the cities do, for example, is about an $800 test. So private well owners aren't going to go to that trouble, but there's certain elements that should be tested for frequently.
Thank you. And Wes asked, when you went to the legislature with these proposals, did you get equal resistance from both sides, or do you feel like maybe with our DFL trifecta, we have a better shot at this? What kind of movement have we seen, or are you expecting better?
It's interesting that 2 years ago, we had co-authors on the IR side. That didn't happen last year. So it's waxing and waning polarization as well, along with these issues. But that's where I think the political movement, everybody cares about their water. And so it really resonates with everybody, and then coming up with the types of reasonable programs that would assist people is the key.
Thank you. Teresa, was your question answered, or do you still have a question about what you had mentioned about showing that the state did not do enough?
Could you, Carly, give examples of what you had to include in your petition on the failure on the part of the state or local officials? Like, do we have express examples where people went to the Department of Health or MDA or their local health officials or township officials and got no response?
That's a really good question, Teresa. One example that we go through the different state agencies that are named in a section at the end of the petition and talk through the actions that have been taken and why they aren't, why there needs to be more that's done. And one good example is that we had a groundwater protection rule that the Department of Agriculture passed in 2019, which initially, when they'd initially scoped the rule, they had envisioned that they would look at the township scale in a way that would protect private well owners in addition to those on public water systems. But in the final rule, they narrowed the regulatory actions that were possible under the rule to those public water systems. So they went from the township scale down to just the public water system scale. And even at that scale, the rule has been in effect for 4 years now, since 2019. None of those regulatory levels of action have been used anywhere across the state. And over 4 years, all that we've gotten under the rule is 3 lists of best management practices, which are 3 to 5 pages each, which largely document practices that farmers have already begun to take within the affected areas, the limited public water supply BWSMA. and that these best management practice rules have an uncertain timeline for compliance. It could be 3 years or more before we see any of those regulatory level actions taken. So that lag and continued reluctance to use any of the regulatory tools available is one of the examples that we cite.
Thank you. And I see Jeff wants to add something.
Yeah, if I can, the petition, we put together a 50-year history of the problem where almost every data set we're seeing has rising levels of nitrates. So, we have 5 decades of action and billions of dollars spent, but not effectively. The most recent one was a particular insult to me, frankly, was the local watershed plan. One watershed, one plan for this area included the karst, and they number one issue cited by people was drinking water. But when it comes to their implementation plan, they're saying, well, 8 nutrient management plans a year for 10 years, 1 water testing clinic a year. They allotted $500 to the health department to help with this. It was completely absent in effective actions. So we have all this good science. We know what the problem is. We know what the source is. We know where the sensitivities are, but we've never moved to action that affect people at their kitchen tap. And that's where the public health perspective really comes into play, I think.
Thank you. And Margaret Siebel asks, are there home filters that you can use to protect yourself from the nitrate and arsenic contaminants?
Yes. Almost any contaminant, there are effective means of treatment. They vary in cost. I use a reverse osmosis. It costs me about $1 a day for my water. That's cheaper than bottled water. People too often default to bottled water. It's actually one of the most expensive and wasteful ways to do it. So there's water delivery services. You can haul your water, and there's treatments for pesticides, PFAS, nitrates, arsenic, whatever. And it's a buyer beware issue, though. You really want to know what you're shopping for based on your water test and actually having those tests done.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like Carly wants to add.
Yeah, I actually, back to Teresa's question, one more point that I wanted to make is that, our state feedlot rules were last revised in 2000, so almost 24 years ago. So that's another area that, that we've talked about where we may need to take a look back at those, and with a particular attention to vulnerable groundwater areas like the karst. To see if we need to do a revision of those state feedlot rules.
And kind of on the same vein, someone asked if our nitrate levels or manure levels are too high, or if they're not meeting standards. Like, do we need to revise those?
Yeah, because we're a environmental law nonprofit, we have a lot of staff attorneys, and we've started to really look closely at areas like our state feedlot rules to see if there are changes that we could make through a rule revision to help us address this issue. But the two most relevant, the only two really regulatory tools that we have thus far statewide is that groundwater protection rule, which, as I mentioned, the issue has to do with really no deadlines for compliance, very loose timelines, and a slow pace of action. That's the groundwater protection rule under the Department of Ag, and then our feedlot rules, which are under the Pollution Control Agency. Those are the two areas of regulatory tools we have.
Thank you. All right. And with that, I would like to introduce our resolution chair. Matt, are you available?
I think I am.
Awesome.
There we go. Hey, Vita. Thanks, Vita, and thanks to Carly and Jeff for that presentation. Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our resolutions process for this this election cycle. I'm the vice chair of the DFL Environmental Caucus, but also the chair of the resolutions committee. So right now we're working on putting together some slate of platform resolutions that we're going to promote at precinct caucuses and then upward through the DFL process to get to the convention, where we hope to get them added to the DFL party platform and action agenda, where they can be really visible and help influence our policymakers, and just get the word out about our priorities. So we really appreciate the information we gotten tonight about drinking water, because I think that's one of our big priorities this year, is to do a really solid drinking water resolution, especially for groundwater, which I think has been neglected in a lot of policy arenas. So that's really great. And we also would appreciate caucus members submitting your ideas for resolutions, or even working with us to craft them. We have plenty of room still on the resolutions committee. So if you're interested, you can email me. Let's see, I'm not sure if I can send everybody my email in the chat. Maybe Megan could do that. And we also have a form up, a survey for resolution ideas. So to fill that out, that's also really helpful to us to kind of get a sense of what's a priority for the members of our caucus. I've already seen a whole bunch of great ones submitted so far. So thanks to everybody who's done that. But yeah, I think it's also important that we do this, because a lot of organizations kind of take their lead from us. They promote their own resolutions, but sometimes ours kind of become the template, or the kind of the gold standard, for lack of a better word, for other orgs. So hope to have some really great ideas come out this year.
We got a lot of great ones from our presenters tonight for both federal and state actions. So thank you very much. We'll really look forward to seeing those slides and sharing them out with our members too. And with that, we're back to Megan.
Thanks. Sorry, just finishing up asking a few questions in the chat. Jeff and Carly, a couple people are asking if you'd be willing to share your contact information, if you'd be willing to put that in the chat, if people could just email you to reach out. That would be fantastic. And then I will put I put Matt Dahl's email address in the chat for everyone, and I will share that survey that was sent out to our membership last week here again in the chat. I did it at the beginning, but I'll do it again right now. Oops, that is not the right one. Excuse me. Sorry. It looks like it was about half of what it should have been. My apologies. Okay, there's the resolution survey. And then Jeff Broberg, I am putting his stuff. Oh, sorry, just got a lot to do here. Email and phone number in the chat right now as well. So if anyone's interested in reaching out, talk some more about this incredibly great information, which affects a whole lot of people in the state, as we saw, please feel free to reach out. And then Carly wrote hers in there as well. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, everyone, for Carly and for Jeff and all this wonderful information. Carly, again, thank you so much for being here again. You're a wealth of information. I know so much of the Environmental Caucus has does work so much around water, especially in the water-rich state of Minnesota. So your expertise is always great. And Jay just put in the chat, she's a step ahead of me. I was just going to say, please do join the caucus. It is right on our website. We don't currently charge for membership dues, but we are actively fundraising. We are taking a new approach to some our endorsements this coming year, and we would like to really do some active giving towards our environmental challenger candidates, ones that are really looking to keep a seat in a purple district, have primary challengers, and help out their campaign to the extent that we are possible. Because as much as we love being out there and door knocking and helping as much as we can, unfortunately, one of the things that really does help them a lot is money for mailers and to pay their staff and anything else that we can make happen. So please do join the caucus and and please donate if you can. You can set up recurring payments too. So, you know, a lump sum of $200 seems like a lot. Set up $10 a month. We really appreciate us all. Every little bit helps. So thank you very much. And thank you again to Carly and Jeff. And another one of our board members, Janelle just put it in there. Said thank you, Carly and Jeff. It was a great presentation.
Thank you for having us.
It was a pleasure and an honor. Really a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to cut the recording.